Hollywood has always been a place where dreams are made, but behind the golden glow and velvet curtains, some of its brightest stars were hiding shadows even darker than the roles they played. From sultry silver screen icons to beloved TV personalities, these vintage celebrities weren't just famous, they were infamous too. Behind their charm, charisma, and camera-ready smiles lurked deep dark secrets that would eventually land them behind bars. Fame doesn't always come with a happy ending. Sometimes, it comes with handcuffs. Who were these fallen icons whose fame couldn't keep them out of a jail cell? Let's uncover the shocking truths behind these 18 vintage Hollywood stars who traded red carpets for prison bars. Paul Kelly. Paul Kelly was a popular leading man of the silent film era and early talkies, known for his brooding charm and stage presence. Born in 1899, he began acting as a child and became a familiar face in both theater and Hollywood. In 1927, his rising career took a dark turn when he got involved in a high-profile affair with the stage actress Dorothy Mackay, who was married to actor and former police officer Ray Raymond. Tensions boiled over when Kelly confronted Raymond, leading to a violent fight that ended in Raymond's death from a fractured skull and internal injuries. Kelly was convicted of manslaughter and served just over 2 years in San Quentin. Dorothy was also jailed for 10 months for attempting to cover up the affair. After his release, Kelly married Dorothy, and remarkably, Hollywood welcomed him back. He resumed his career, eventually earning a Tony Award and continuing to act in films through the 1940s and 50s. Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle. In 1921, Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle was one of Hollywood's biggest stars, wealthy, famous, and well-connected. But his world came crashing down over Labor Day weekend when he hosted a lavish party at San Francisco's St. Francis Hotel. Among the guests was a rising actress, Virginia Rappe. During the party, something went terribly wrong. Virginia was found in severe pain, rushed to the hospital, and died days later from a ruptured bladder and internal injuries. Arbuckle was accused of assaulting her, with rumors spreading that he used a champagne bottle. Though he denied it, the media went wild. Headlines painted him as a monster, and the public turned on him. He faced 3 trials for manslaughter. The first 2 ended in hung juries. The third acquitted him in just 6 minutes, with the jury issuing a rare apology, saying Arbuckle had been greatly wronged. Despite the verdict, Hollywood shut him out. He tried to return under the name Will Be Good, but his career never fully recovered. Just as he began to find small roles again, Arbuckle died of a heart attack in 1933 at age 46. William S. Burroughs. William S. Burroughs was a literary rebel and a founding figure of the Beat generation. Born into a wealthy St. Louis family in 1914, he rejected the traditional path and instead embraced a world of addiction, rebellion, and underground culture. He ran with Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg. But while they chased freedom in verse, Burroughs descended into darker corners of society. In New York, he met Joan Vollmer, intelligent, sharp, and equally troubled. Their relationship, marked by substance abuse and volatility, eventually took them to Mexico City in 1949. On September 6, 1951, during a party, Burroughs attempted a drunken William Tell stunt, aiming to shoot a glass off Joan's head. He missed, killing her instantly. Burroughs claimed it was an accident. Held briefly in a Mexican jail, he skipped bail and fled to the U.S. The charges were later dropped due to insufficient evidence and jurisdictional issues. Spade Klie. In the 1940s, Spade Klie was a celebrated figure in American entertainment, known as the King of Western Swing, a lively blend of country jazz and big band music. With movie roles, a popular TV show, and a devoted fan base, he was a star. But behind the fame was a man plagued by a violent temper, alcoholism, and a dangerous sense of control. His marriage to Ella Mae Evans, once admired for its glamour, became toxic and abusive. On April 3, 1961, Klie brutally beat Ella to death in front of their 14-year-old daughter, Melody, allegedly in a fit of jealous rage over suspected infidelity. After attempting to hide the crime, Melody escaped and alerted the authorities. Klie was arrested, tried, and found guilty of first-degree murder. Melody's harrowing courtroom testimony played a pivotal role in the conviction. He was sentenced to life in prison. However, in 1969, Cooley was granted parole and allowed to perform a farewell concert for inmates. Tom Neal. Tom Neal was a classic 1940s Hollywood heartthrob. Square jaw, dreamy eyes, dark, brooding energy. Not quite a top-tier leading man, but he had that bad boy magnetism that made him perfect for B-movies. He's best known for his role in Detour, 1945, a gritty, low-budget noir flick that somehow became a cult classic. And that movie feels like his actual life, a slow, smoky ride into disaster. In real life, Tom had a seriously nasty temper, a quick left hook, and a taste for toxic love stories. And nothing shows that better than his love triangle with beauty queen and actress Barbara Payton. Barbara was a blonde bombshell, gorgeous, wild, and famously self-destructive. She bounced between lovers like a pinball, but two men stuck. Tom Neal and Franchot Tone, a respected actor from a higher Hollywood tier. While Barbara was engaged to Franchot, she kept an affair with Tom on the side. In 1951, Tom Neal showed up at Barbara's house and found Franchot there. What happened next was legendary. Tom beat Franchot so badly, he crushed his cheekbone, broke his nose, and gave him a concussion. Franchot ended up in the hospital for days. No charges were filed because of Hollywood's influence. Barbara eventually married Franchot, but ran right back to Tom. In 1965, Tom was now older, washed up, and married to a woman named Gail Bennett. She was a receptionist, pretty, young, and probably unaware she was stepping into the twisted world of Tom Neal. In April of that year, Gail went missing. Days later, police found her body buried in the backyard of their Palm Springs home. She'd been shot in the back of the head. Tom claimed it was an accident. He said they were struggling over a gun, and it went off. But the police didn't buy it for a second. The way her body was buried, covered with bleach and plastic, seemed planned. Tom was arrested and charged with murder. At trial, his lawyer managed to wrangle the charge down to involuntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to 10 years, served just under 6, and was released in 1971. And just a year later, in 1972, he died of a heart attack, alone in his apartment. Roman Palansky. In the late 1970s, Roman Palansky was already that artsy, brooding genius everyone in Hollywood fawns over. He survived the Holocaust and the Manson family, an occult group who literally murdered his pregnant wife, Sharon Tate. People looked at him like this tragic, misunderstood creative god. March 10, 1977, Palansky invited 13-year-old Samantha Geimer, a blonde, wide-eyed teen, to a photo shoot at Jack Nicholson's Hollywood home. Roman rolled up with champagne and quaaludes. He got this poor girl tipsy and sedated, then proceeded to assault her in multiple ways, while she cried, saying no and asking to go home all through. She later described the whole thing vividly, saying she was terrified and physically in pain. This wasn't just some vague rumor or scandal, Roman admitted to it. He didn't deny it. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of unlawful intercourse with a minor. The judge threw Roman in prison for a real sentence. Roman dipped, he fled the country overnight. He left the US in 1978 and ran off to France. France couldn't extradite him because he's also a French citizen. Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein was Hollywood's kingmaker, big, loud, aggressive, and with a rep as the genius behind indie masterpieces Pulp Fiction, Good Will Hunting, Shakespeare in Love, which won him an Oscar. He had that much power, the untouchable, Godfather-type power. But there were whispers, uncomfortable silences, side eyes from assistants, and girls leaving hotel rooms looking broken. In 2017, journalists Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey from the New York Times dropped a bombshell article. They didn't just accuse Harvey, they brought receipts, years of payoffs, NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, settlements, and women who had finally had enough of being silenced. The consistent stories said Harvey invited women, often very young, aspiring actresses or assistants, to hotel rooms under the pretense of a meeting behind closed doors. He'd appear in a bathrobe with gross requests. Some were assaulted, others were forced into intimate acts, and dozens had been living in shame and fear, thinking they were alone, until women like Ashley Judd, Gwyneth Paltrow, Angelina Jolie, Salma Hayek, and Lupita Nyong'o all came forward with variations of the same horror story. One woman, Lucia Evans, said she was just 21 and a college student when Harvey forced oral intimacy on her. Another, Miriam Haley, a production assistant, said he held her down and forcibly performed intimate acts on her while she begged him to stop. The industry panicked. Harvey was dropped from his own company, and the #MeToo movement exploded, founded by Tarana Burke years earlier. Women everywhere, actresses, journalists, students, fast food workers, began telling their own stories of abuse and power. Meanwhile, Harvey tried to act confused. He denied it all, claiming everything was consensual. In the New York trial in 2020, he was found guilty of criminal assault in the 3rd degree and sentenced to 23 years in prison. In Los Angeles, another court found him guilty again in 2022 for assault involving multiple women. He got an extra 16 years tacked on. Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby was the man everybody trusted, always talking about family, morals, education, respectability. But behind closed doors, he was sedating women and assaulting them for decades. For years, no one talked, or rather, they did, but nobody listened. Who would believe that Bill Cosby, the man with honorary degrees, TV shows, and speeches at universities, was out here violating women things, really began to shift in 2005 when Andrea Constand stepped forward with a bold accusation. She claimed Bill Cosby had sedated and assaulted her at his home. Andrea worked at Temple University, where Cosby was a big-time donor, so it was complicated and messy. She reported it to the police, but prosecutors didn't pursue charges. Instead, she took him to civil court. Cosby quietly settled, paid her off, and just like that, parts of the case were swept under the rug. Then came 2014. Comedian Hannibal Buress made a joke during a stand-up routine, bluntly calling Cosby a predator. It went viral, and what followed was a tidal wave. One by one, women began to speak up. Some were familiar faces from Hollywood, others were models, waitresses, interns, even students. Their stories were eerily similar. Allegations of being drugged, losing consciousness, waking up confused, powerless, and silent. One woman said she was just 15 when Cosby brought her to the Playboy Mansion. Another described waking up in the middle of the assault, unable to scream or move. By 2018, the reckoning finally arrived. Cosby was back in court, this time facing criminal charges for what he did to Constand. There was no dodging accountability anymore. The jury found him guilty of drugging and assaulting her. He was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in state prison. After decades of silence, the truth had finally caught up. Phil Spector. Phil Spector was a music producer. He was the genius behind the wall of sound, that rich, echoing, goosebump-making technique that made 1960s hits feel larger than life. He gave the world unforgettable hits like Be My Baby, and worked with icons like the Ronettes and the Beatles. He was rich, eccentric, and undeniably talented, but behind the genius was a darker side people often brushed off. Whispers about his obsession with guns followed him everywhere. He'd wave them around in the studio, point them at musicians and women alike. There was a Venus story that he once fired into a studio ceiling during a tantrum over a missed note. Still, people shrugged it off, calling him quirky, troubled, or just a complicated genius. On February 3rd, Spector met actress Lana Clarkson at the House of Blues in LA. She'd once been a rising star in the 80s, but now she was working the door. He charmed her, and they ended up at his Gothic mansion, the so-called Pyrenees Castle. By morning, Lana was dead, shot in the mouth, slumped in a chair, blood on the floor. Phil walked out, reportedly telling his driver, "I think I killed someone." Spector claimed it was suicide, but the evidence told another story. Gunshot residue on him, blood on his clothes, the impossible angle of the shot, and a history of threatening women with guns. The genius narrative crumbled, and the world saw the red flags for what they truly were. Still, it took 2 trials to bring him down. The first one in 2007 ended in a hung jury. Some people still couldn't wrap their heads around sending a music icon to prison. The second trial in 2009, Phil Spector was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 19 years to life. Throughout the trials, he looked completely deranged. He showed up in court wearing wild, poofy wigs that made him look like a mad scientist. In 2021, at the age of 81, Phil Spector died in prison from complications related to COVID-19. Tim Allen. Before he became the wisecracking dad on Home Improvement, the voice behind Buzz Lightyear, or the beloved Santa Claus in the Santa Claus, Tim Allen, born Timothy Allen Dick, had a very different life. Long before fame and family-friendly roles, he was caught up in something far more serious. In 1978, Tim was arrested at the Kalamazoo Airport in Michigan with over 650 grams of cocaine, a federal offense with the potential for a life sentence. This was a major drug trafficking charge. Facing the weight of that reality, he struck a deal with federal authorities, providing information on other dealers in exchange for a reduced sentence. Thanks to that deal, Tim received a sentence of 3 to 7 years and ultimately served just over 2 years at Sandstone Federal Correctional Institution in Minnesota. He was released in 1981. Determined to change course, he poured himself into stand-up comedy, using his past as part of his material and building a new identity. By the early 1990s, he had reinvented himself and become a household name. However, comedy fame didn't make him immune to personal struggles. In 1997, he faced legal trouble again, this time for driving under the influence in Michigan. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to rehab and probation. Martha Stewart. Martha Stewart, once the undisputed queen of home living, built a lifestyle empire around elegance, precision, and taste. Her name became synonymous with domestic perfection through best-selling cookbooks, hit TV shows, and branded products in major stores like Macy's. In the early 2000s, her image remained untouchable until the Clone scandal shook her carefully crafted world. In December 2001, Martha sold nearly 4,000 shares of Clone systems just before the stock plummeted. The sale raised red flags, as it came shortly after she allegedly received a tip from her broker that the company's CEO was also selling off shares ahead of a negative FDA decision. Martha denied wrongdoing, claiming she had a prearranged deal to sell the stock if it dropped below a certain price. While she wasn't charged with insider trading, prosecutors pursued her for obstructing the investigation. In 2004, she was convicted on 4 counts: conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and making false statements. Her sentence included 5 months in prison, 5 months of home confinement, and 2 years of probation. Charles Manson and the family. Charles Manson appeared at first to be just another troubled ex-con, a failed musician with a raw childhood and an intense desire for fame. What made him dangerous wasn't violence, it was his unsettling ability to manipulate. With a charismatic, almost hypnotic charm, he drew in mostly young, vulnerable women, convincing them he was a prophet, even claiming he was Jesus. By the late 1960s, he had formed what became known as the Manson family, a group of devoted followers living on the remote Spahn Ranch outside Los Angeles. Behind the talk of love and spiritual awakening was a darker agenda. Manson preached a warped theory he called Helter Skelter, inspired by a Beatles song. He believed a race war was inevitable and that his followers would survive and rule in its aftermath. In August 1969, Manson sent his followers to commit a series of brutal murders. The first victims included actress Sharon Tate, who was 8 months pregnant, and 4 others at her home. The next night, another couple, Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, were killed. The crimes were gruesome, with messages scrawled in blood at the scenes. The killings stunned Hollywood and triggered widespread fear. Eventually, the Manson family began to unravel. Several members were arrested on unrelated charges, and one, Susan Atkins, started confessing. The shocking truth emerged, and in 1971, Manson and several followers were convicted of multiple murders. He was sentenced to death, though it was later commuted to life in prison. Manson died behind bars in 2017, still unrepentant, still clinging to the twisted legacy he left behind. Eddie Fontaine. Born Edward Reardon, Eddie Fontaine began as a rockabilly singer in the early days of rock and roll, known for hits like Nothing Shaken. He enjoyed brief stardom, appeared in teen films, and later transitioned to TV roles on shows like Happy Days and Bonanza. But behind the scenes, his life unraveled. By the early 1980s, caught in a bitter custody battle with his ex-wife, Fontaine made a shocking choice. He tried to hire a hitman to kill her. Unfortunately for him, the hitman was an undercover cop, and he was caught on tape offering payment. Paul Bateson. Paul Bateson was a radiological technologist who briefly stepped into the spotlight with a small but memorable role in The Exorcist, 1973, appearing as a hospital technician in one of the film's most unsettling scenes. His appearance felt disturbingly real because it was. Bateson wasn't an actor, he was simply doing the job he held in real life. 1977, just a few years after his film cameo, Bateson was arrested for the murder of film critic Addison Verrill. Verrill was found bludgeoned and stabbed in his Greenwich Village apartment. Bateson eventually confessed, claiming it was the result of a drunken encounter gone wrong after the two met at a bar. During the investigation, police began to suspect Bateson might be connected to a series of unsolved killings known as the Bag Murders, dismembered male torsos found in the Hudson River. Though never charged or officially linked to those crimes, the theory that a hospital worker was behind them inspired director William Friedkin to create the 1980 film Cruising. Bateson was convicted solely for Verrill's murder and sentenced to 20 years to life in 1979. He served 24 years before his release in 2003. Anthony Pelicano. Anthony Pelicano was a powerful force in Hollywood. Known as the industry's go-to private investigator, his specialty wasn't just digging up dirt. It was intimidation, illegal surveillance, and keeping secrets buried. By the early 2000s, concerns began to surface. Journalists, producers, and ex-spouses reported strange happenings: phone clicks, tailing, and vanishing lawsuits. In 2002, reporter Anita Bush, investigating Steven Seagal's alleged mob ties, found a dead fish and a bullet hole in her car with a note that read, "Stop." The FBI traced the threat back to Pelicano. What followed was a major investigation that exposed a criminal network. Pelicano had been wiretapping phones, hacking information, and using inside help from corrupt cops and tech experts to spy on targets. In 2006, he was convicted on multiple charges including racketeering, wire fraud, and identity theft. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison and released in 2019. Robert Mitchum. Robert Mitchum was the embodiment of Hollywood's early rebel, gravelly voiced, effortlessly cool, and always carrying an edge that set him apart. By 1948, he was on the rise, earning critical praise for Out of the Past and establishing himself as a major screen presence. But just as his star was climbing, Mitchum was arrested during a late-night police raid at a Hollywood home. He was found with a young actress and two others, reportedly smoking marijuana. At a time when drug charges could easily end a career, the arrest made headlines across the country. Charged with conspiracy to possess marijuana, Mitchum faced trial and was ultimately sentenced to 60 days in county jail. Despite the scandal, his career survived, cementing his image as Hollywood's original bad boy. James Brown. James Brown, widely celebrated as the godfather of soul, was a musical pioneer whose influence reshaped funk, soul, and pop culture. But behind the powerful stage presence and iconic sound, his personal life grew increasingly turbulent. By the late 1980s, Brown was battling drug addiction and exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior. In 1988, he made headlines after entering a business seminar in Augusta, Georgia, armed with a shotgun over a dispute about his private restroom. The incident led to a police chase across state lines, ending only after officers disabled his vehicle. Brown was found to be under the influence of PCP and was convicted on multiple charges, including firearms violations, resisting arrest, and assault. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison and served just over 2. Throughout the years, Brown faced several arrests tied to domestic violence, substance abuse, and weapons possession. In his final years, legal troubles and family disputes continued to cloud his legacy, contrasting sharply with the towering contributions he made to music. Claudine Loner. Claudine Loner was a French-American singer and actress known for her gentle voice, striking beauty, and marriage to crooner Andy Williams. She mingled with Hollywood's elite, starred in TV shows and films, and lived a glamorous life until a tragedy in 1976 changed everything. Out that year, Loner made headlines when her boyfriend, Olympic skier Spider Sabiche, was shot and killed in his Aspen home. She claimed the shooting was accidental, saying she was learning to use his gun when it discharged. However, the circumstances raised questions. Sabiche had been shot from a distance, and his back may have been turned. Despite suspicions, critical evidence, including her diary, and the weapon was thrown out due to being obtained without a proper warrant. As a result, Loner was charged with negligent homicide rather than murder. She received a controversial sentence: 30 days in jail, served on weekends. Public reaction was fierce, but Loner withdrew from the spotlight. She later married her defense attorney and has remained completely private ever since, never speaking publicly about the case again. Did any of these stories shock you or change the way you view these once beloved stars? Let us know in the comments below. To like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss more untold Hollywood stories. Thanks for watching.